So, hi everyone. I am Nicola from Morecambe Wills and Estates, and I wanted to talk a little bit today about wills, which may come as a surprise to you. So the first question that I always ask in a group like this is, how many of you have got a will? So the majority of the people that I already know, there is a small group on the group tonight, but I know that the majority don't have a will. So even if you have a will, I always ask, is it valid and is it up to date? Because if it's not, it's just as useless as not having a will, or actually it could even be more dangerous, because things that you might have wanted to happen in the past might not be what you want to happen today. So, you know, the whole point of today is really to talk about not just why don't you have a will, or the importance of making a will. It's actually of keeping it up to date as well. So one of the things that's worth thinking about or worth knowing is that 50% of adults in the UK don't have a valid will, which is actually quite shocking. And the more shocking statistic is that in between the ages of 30 and 55, more than 70% of us don't have a will. So less than 30% do. And that's the age where you're building your life, you're building the assets, you've got children, you may have a business, you've got lots and lots of things going on in your life, and that's the most important time to have a will. So most people think that you don't need a will until you're old, but I can tell you now, you definitely do. So when I ask people why they don't have a will, I always ask why, what's the reason? And all of the research, not just from questions that I ask, but all of the research that is done nationally says there are four main reasons. The first one is it's expensive. The second one is I don't need one, or I don't need one unless I'm old or I'm ill. The third one is I don't know where to start. And the fourth one is, if I make a will, I'm going to die. So those are the main reasons in the survey, in all of the surveys that have been done, of why people don't have a will. So what I wanted to do today was really just to tackle each of those four reasons. And I'm going to start with the last one first. And I can guarantee that if you make a will, of course, you're going to die. But it doesn't mean to say that that's going to be straight away. And making a will does not make you die. I can't guarantee it, but don't be afraid of making a will because you think that you're going to, something's going to happen to you immediately. So I'll talk about the other reasons. The first one is that it's expensive, and it can be expensive. And if you're not careful and you don't know what you want, you can end up spending a lot of money. So if you go to a solicitor, you're probably going to pay around £300 for a standard will. And you may get a little bit of protection in there for a trust, for example. But you pay that sort of money because they've got years of legal training, but they also have overheads. So they have staff and they have offices and all of those costs that they've got to include in there. You can actually do a will online. So there are lots of offers. You'll probably have seen them popping up on your Facebook feed, and most of them are around £29. And you can also do it yourself through a pack through WH Smith's. You could actually also, the other thing you can do is to do it free to support a charity. But one thing I will tell you is that if you do it free to support a charity, in many cases the charity is actually paying. So unless you make a donation, and you'll be pressured quite hard to make a donation, it means that the charities could be losing out. But also you're likely to be pressured to take other services as well. And the other way that you can make a will is you can use a will writer, which are normally cheaper than solicitors. But if you do that, then make sure that you're working with somebody who's fully insured, is fully trained, and is fully regulated. So will writing, just for your information, is not a regulated activity. So anyone can call themselves a will writer, write themselves some business cards and go around and give advice and charge whatever they want. I would always say, make sure they belong to either the Society of Will Writers or to the Institute of Professional Will Writers. I happen to belong to the Society of Will Writers, and what that means is that I've got to be trained, I have to pass exams, I have to continue with professional development on an annual basis. I have to be insured to the tune of £2 million in case I give wrong advice. And I also have to comply, I should say, with their code of compliance. So using a will writer can be cheaper, and my charges, particularly in this area, are specifically made to be affordable. So I charge £100 for a will. As I said, you can be charged about £300 for a solicitor. My standard charge is £100 for a will and £200 for a couple with a trust, or £150 for a couple without a trust. So you can see there straight away that you can do this a little bit cheaper than you do with a solicitor, but you're still going to pay more than doing an online will. And I would always caution around doing an online will or doing a DIY will, because actually all you're doing is putting your information either onto a form or into a system, and no one is giving you any advice. So it doesn't have to be expensive, but you have to balance what you're going to get and paying for a little bit of advice. With my service, I talk to you at home, or if you're away from this area, we do a Zoom call, and I give you proper advice. I talk to you about what your situation is, what your family's like, what you want to include, and crucially, who you might want to exclude. And I talk you through a number of scenarios. So that sort of gives you a little bit of information about, not making a will because it's expensive. I would look at this as like an insurance policy. You would never dream of having a house and not insuring in case it fell down. Yeah, and what you're actually playing around with here is all of your assets, not just your house, but everything else as well. So take a little bit of time to find a good will writer, and it's entirely up to you. You can go to a solicitor, but you don't have to, is what I'm trying to say. So that's one of the reasons that a lot of people don't make a will. One of the other reasons is that they don't know where to start. And it's quite overwhelming, actually. And particularly during, whether you call it COVID times, lockdown, the uncertain times we've had, whatever you might want to call it, we've had lots of people start to make inquiries and then just back off because they just feel overwhelmed. So it is a really daunting thing to do. And I try and make it as easy as I can. That lots and lots of people, lots of companies out there, lots of information for you to look at, and that can lead to overload. I just really don't know where to start. Do I go here? Do I go there? I don't know what I need. I don't know what I don't know is probably the best way to describe it. When we do wills with you, we give you a pack, and the pack says, it's called What to Consider When You're Making a Will. It's quite simple, really. But it talks you through the things that you might have to consider, who you might want to be your executors, the people who look after your estate. If you have children, who you might want to have as guardians, the things that you might want to do with your property, gifts of money, things like supporting charities. And we list them all down, and we give you that normally a week before your appointment. So you've got time to discuss it in your own home, and you don't have to make decisions straight away. I often go to appointments. And I went to an appointment today, for example, with a couple, and they'd had this pack, but they just hadn't had time to sit down, and we talked through all of these things. But I didn't say you have to make a decision today. The way that I work is basically just to say, let's go through as many questions as we can. Let's make some decisions today. I'll send you my notes. I'll tell you what we still need to know. I'll draft up a will, and then you've got a little bit more time to think about it. So not knowing where to start shouldn't be a reason not to start. I think the thing that I do is try and make it as easy as possible for people, so that it doesn't become daunting and it doesn't become overwhelming. But what I will say is there's a lot of things to think about when you make a will. And lots of people say to me, I didn't know that I had to think about all of these things. So, not knowing what you need to think about is not an excuse to start. I can help you through understanding what you have to think about. So I think the biggest thing that people say that they haven't made a will is because they don't think they need one. So I'm just going to go through some reasons and some scenarios with why you do need one. The first and most important one is you want a choice of what happens and where things go to. There's a common misconception that if you're in a relationship, your partner will just get everything. I don't need a will because I'm already married, or I'm living with my partner, or I haven't got a partner and I'm just going to have children. Everything will go to them. You have to be really careful with that misconception, because not everything always goes to your partner. So there are rules around what people automatically inherit. So if you die without a will, you die with what's known as intestate. So your estate is intestate. And that basically means you've either not got a will, or your will can't be found, or your will wasn't valid. And then a certain set of rules called the inheritance law rules actually kick in. So if you don't have a will, then the government decides, based on laws that have been there for quite some time, who is entitled to your estate. So if you're married, then your spouse is entitled to much of your estate, but not all of it. So they're entitled to the first £270,000, and then half of everything else. So depending on the size of your estate, that might be everything. But if you've got a bigger estate, don't assume that your partner is actually going to inherit everything of yours if you don't have a will. So having a will actually makes sure that if you want your partner to be the first person who's going to inherit everything, it's actually stated and it's in writing. One of the other reasons that you need a will is if you have a property. So if you have a property, just be careful, particularly if you own it jointly with someone. Not all properties are owned in the same way. So especially for joint owners. So you need to understand how it's owned. There are two types of ways of owning. There are joint tenants and tenants in common. I'm not going to go into the detail at the moment, but they are different in law. And for some cases, it means that your property isn't not automatically passed to your partner. It passes outside of your will. But what you have to be careful of is if you do pass your property to your partner, then you run the risk of you eventually want it to be inherited by your children in most cases. But if you pass it to your partner and your partner remarries, then your children are unlikely to get your property. If you pass it to your partner and your partner needs care in later life, again, your children may miss out on their inheritance. So if you have a property, it's absolutely critical that you have a will. And in the olden days, I'm going to call it several years ago, many mortgage companies actually wouldn't give you a mortgage unless you had a will. They've stopped doing that, but they strongly advise you. When you go and get a mortgage, they'll strongly advise you to make sure you have a will or your will is updated, because your property is normally your main asset in life. The other reason for having a will is if you have children. This is, for many people, it's probably the most important thing. So if you have got no property, if you've got no savings, if you've got no business, but you have children, that's the main reason to make a will. So in a will, you state who you want to be the legal guardians of your children under 18. If you don't have a will, you may think that your family, oh, my sister and her husband can look after the children. They have no right in law. Yeah, so if anything happens to both of you, or if anything happens to one of you, and you don't already have a legal guardian with your ex-partner, for example, no one has a right in law to be a legal guardian for a child. And whilst those decisions are being made, there is a possibility, this doesn't happen often, but it does happen. There is a possibility that children are taken into care whilst those decisions are being made. And that's the last thing that you want. If you know who you want to look after your children, write it in your will, get them appointed as a legal guardian, and now you have no problem. So for anyone who's a parent of children under 18, for no other reason, that's the reason why you need a will. Number of other reasons. One of the other reasons is if you've just got married or actually remarried, then just know that your will is automatically revoked. So if you do have a will and you've just been married, your will is automatically revoked unless you put in a clause before you get married to say, I don't want that to happen. So just an example there, I had a client who had made, her and her husband had made wills 13 years ago when they first bought their first property. And then they got married a year later. So for 12 years, and since then they've had children, they've had 2 wills that haven't been valid because they were automatically revoked on marriage. But they didn't know that. So they'd gone along in the assumption that everything would be fine. And actually all they did was they called me to say, well, actually, we would really like to make sure that our kids are named, and we do a few other things. And they were quite shocked to actually realise that their wills for the last 12 years hadn't been valid. So if anything had have happened to them, then the laws of inheritance, as I described earlier, would have come into play. And that actually wasn't what they wanted to happen. So it's the one thing that people don't realise, and even when you get a will, you know, you'll see it in a little envelope from the solicitors or whatever, and quite often it will say, if you get married, this will is revoked, and people don't read the little front of the envelope. So just talking about the opposite of getting married or getting remarried is separating or divorcing. So if you're going through either of that, if you're going through a separation or if you're going through a divorce, you need to either make or update a will. So first of all, the common misconception is once you're separated, that your spouse is not entitled to anything. Actually, your spouse or civil partner is still entitled to inherit. So even if you're going through a divorce, until the decree absolute is in place, your civil partner will still inherit your will. And they also have a say in how, if anything happened to you, what your funeral would be, how your assets would be distributed, everything. They have a say still. So if you don't want them, because you're going through a separation, if you don't want them to inherit during that time, just in case anything happened to you and you wanted, for example, to make sure that your children had it, then you must make sure that you either have a will or you change your will. For those who have already been divorced and have gone through a decree absolute, basically what a decree absolute does is a divorce just says in your will, it doesn't revoke your will, but basically what it does is it just says that your will, the person that you were married to previously no longer features in your will. Now that might be okay, but think about if you had your sister-in-law, for example, as an executor. Would you really want that person still to be an executor if you weren't married to their sister? That's something to be to take into consideration. Or you might still have some of their family as beneficiaries of your will. You might not want that to happen. So after marriage, through separation, after divorce, make sure that your will is up to date. And just talking about relationships, the biggest challenge is for those who are not married. So if you're cohabiting with someone, you live with someone, you're not married, you're not in a civil partnership, just be aware, do not assume that your partner is entitled to anything at all, because actually in law they aren't. And I've actually seen where we've had a couple who are married and they have children, and if anything happens to one of them, their children are going to inherit ahead of their partner. So what that actually means is that you could be fighting your own children or your partner's children for access to money, for the house, to have any rights in funeral wishes, any rights in how these things are distributed in the future. The other reason you need to be careful with cohabiting couples is you don't get the same rights for inheritance tax. If you're married, you get lots of allowances, and you get much preferential treatment if you're married or in a civil partnership than you do if you're cohabiting. So if your estate is likely to be over £325,000 each, or one of you is likely to go over 325,000, you need to take advice if you're not married and you're living together, because you don't get the same benefits as you do if you're married. The one thing I'll say is, even if you're none of these, I've told you lots of reasons why you need a will. Even if you're none of these, you're a single person, you've not got a property, you've not got children, you've not got a business, you might think you don't need a will. Just realise that if you don't have a will, your family are going to have to be the ones that pick up the pieces afterwards, and they could be left with a mess. So many people come to me and say, I want to make a will because I've lost a friend or I've lost a relative. And I had no idea how hard it was to deal with banks, with building societies, with insurance companies, with the government, with the Department of Work and Pensions, with the DVLA, when there is no will in place. And I'm having to prove that I'm the person who should be able to do this on their behalf. So if you don't make a will for yourself, make a will for the people that you're going to leave behind. And all too often I hear, well, it won't matter because I'm not going to be here. They can just sort out. What you don't realize is the mess and actually how difficult it is to administer an estate when you're facing delays in getting access to all of these things. Think about the people that you're leaving behind and make it easy for them. So I suppose the message that I'm trying to give you is, if you haven't got one yet, make a will. And if you have got one, have a look at it. And we recommend that you update your will, or at least review your will every 3 to 5 years. If you haven't looked at it in an awful long time, then have a look at it. If you want some advice from me, I do free will reviews. So you can send me your will, you can talk to me about what you were originally trying to achieve and whether that's changed, and I'll give you a full written report of what my observations are. I also do free 30-minute consultations. So if you don't know where to start, or you just want a bit of a chat, you can just book an appointment and we'll have a chat about it. And then you can also make an appointment, for me to come to your home. And then finally, the other thing that I also advise is I've got a number of free guides. So if you go to my website on www, it's always hard to say, .morecambewills.co.uk, or I'll put the details in the chat. I have a series, you look under request information, and I have a series of guides. They've just been launched, and they are things like going through separation and divorce, or wills for cohabiting couples, or wills for new parents. There are a number, about 16 different guides. You can ask for as many as you want, go away, read them in your own time, and then come back and make an appointment with me and ask for information. So that's what I wanted to tell you tonight. And if you have any questions, then please contact me either through the website, Facebook, or on 01524 571 032.